In a tranquil village nestled under the shadow of a verdant mountain, a sense of calm pervaded the days. John, a 71-year-old farmer, had spent decades cultivating the same modest plot of land, his calloused hands evidence of a life dedicated to labor. Each morning, he could be found walking his faithful old dog through fields of swaying crops. Afternoons were reserved for tending to his vegetable garden, and as the day waned, he would sip tea on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Despite his routine simplicity, John's demeanor held a quiet mystique. His wiry frame belied surprising strength, and his piercing eyes hinted at a history he rarely spoke of. The neighbors admired his unwavering kindness and willingness to lend a helping hand, but no one truly understood the depths of his past. In his solitude, there was a calm resilience, a strength born of hardship that emanated from within. However, this serene existence was shattered when a group of strangers rolled into the village, disrupting the harmony with their loud motorcycles and brazen demeanor. Led by a man known only as Blaze, whose scarred face and intimidating presence seemed to embody chaos itself, the group quickly turned the village into their playground of intimidation and extortion. Their arrival was like a dark cloud hanging over the once peaceful land. The villagers, unsure how to respond, retreated further into their quiet lives, unwilling to risk confrontation. The scene at the general store encapsulated this shift. As John stepped in to purchase his staples, he found Mrs. Hattie trembling behind the counter, while three men loomed over her with threats of violence. John's presence went unnoticed at first, but when he finally spoke, his voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Have you forgotten what it means to be human?" he asked, his tone both calm and commanding. The sheer confidence in his words drew the attention of everyone in the room. When the gang turned to confront him, they were met with an implacable force, not of physical might, but of moral conviction and an unyielding sense of justice. As night fell, a suffocating darkness enveloped the village, silencing the usual rustle of evening life. Inside their modest homes, villagers huddled in tense silence, their whispers laced with fear of what the shadows might bring. For John, the quiet was different. Not a retreat, but a preparation. The weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily upon him, yet his expression remained calm, deliberate. With steady hands, he checked the makeshift defenses he and the others had prepared, ensuring that every rope, every tool was within reach. His dog, a steadfast companion, lingered by his side, sensing the unease but drawing comfort from John's resolve. The flicker of a lone lantern cast shifting shadows across the room, amplifying the tension. John sat on his worn chair, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the window. A storm was brewing, not of rain and wind, but of danger and conflict. Memories of battles long past surfaced in his mind, moments of triumph, loss, and survival etched into his very being. He wasn't scared, but his heart ached for the village, the innocent faces he had come to know as family. When the first distant roar of motorcycles pierced the stillness, John stood. His movements were unhurried yet purposeful, each step a testament to his determination. As the noise grew louder, he stepped outside, the cool night air bristling against his skin. There, under the faint glow of the moon, he waited, a lone figure amidst the vast shadows, bracing for the storm that was sure to come. The confrontation was anything but equal, a fraught tension thickening the air. John stood at the edge of his property, his frame silhouetted against the faint glow of the village behind him. Before him, the gang advanced, their figures rough and looming, the cacophony of revving engines amplifying their intent to intimidate. The leader, his scar cutting a jagged line across his face, stepped forward, a mocking grin playing on his lips. John felt his heart quicken, but his hands stayed steady, gripping the handle of a rusted farming tool that had served him in a different life. The memories of past struggles sharpened his focus. This wasn't just a fight for survival, but for the dignity of the villagers who had suffered in silence. He stepped forward, deliberate and unyielding. The leader sneered, barking commands at his men. They fanned out, a display of strength meant to overwhelm. But John's eyes didn't waver. "You've made your choice," he said, his voice calm but resonating with an undercurrent of steel. The first attacker lunged, but John moved with the fluidity of someone who had weathered battles before. He sidestepped, bringing the blunt end of his tool down swiftly, neutralizing the man before spinning to block another's advance. Chaos erupted. Shouts and cries pierced the night as John defied the odds with movements precise and decisive. Despite his age, he was unrelenting, driven by something deeper than strength alone, a determination to protect what mattered. Yet he wasn't invincible. A sharp pain shot through his side as one attacker's strike found its mark, but he gritted his teeth, his resolve hardening. As the gang began to retreat, their bravado waning, John's stance remained firm, his presence a silent warning. In the quiet that followed, his breath came heavy, his body aching, but his spirit remained unbroken. Alone under the night sky, he stood as a lone sentinel, guarding a flicker of hope in a village long oppressed. The arrival of old comrades brought a wave of hope to the beleaguered village, a spark of light in the looming darkness. John stood on the porch, his lean frame outlined against the soft hues of the dawn. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for movement, while the air carried the faint chill of morning dew. The wait, though only minutes, stretched endlessly, burdened with memories of the countless battles he had fought alongside these men. And then, from the dusty path winding through the fields, figures began to materialize, one by one. Their familiar gaits, sturdy boots hitting the ground with practiced confidence, reignited something deep within him, a feeling of solidarity forged in the fires of war. Mark was the first to reach him, taller than John but no less haggard. His face bore the same lines etched by time and hardship. Without a word, he clasped John's shoulder, his calloused hand firm and reassuring. "It's been a long road," he said at last, his voice low, steady, yet heavy with the understanding of all that was at stake. John met his gaze, a brief smile flickering across his lips. "It's good to have you here, old friend," he replied, his tone betraying both relief and the deep burden of leadership he carried. As the group gathered, the courtyard transformed into an impromptu command center. The quiet hum of planning began to fill the air. John and Mark pored over a hand-drawn map of the village, pointing out vantage points and areas most vulnerable to attack. Behind them, the rest of the group began organizing supplies. Sharpened farming tools now turned into makeshift weapons, ropes, planks, and buckets of water lined against the walls. Villagers approached cautiously, their expressions shifting from despair to cautious optimism as they saw John surrounded by a band of experienced fighters. John's voice, firm and clear, resonated through the yard as he assigned roles and explained strategies. Each word carried the weight of responsibility, but also the unyielding determination of a man who had seen the worst and come out on the other side. Mark, always the steady second in command, interjected occasionally, his insights adding depth to their plan. These were not men planning their first fight. These were veterans who understood the cost of every decision. As the hours wore on, preparations took on a solemn urgency. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows as villagers joined in. John moved among them, offering quiet words of encouragement, his presence a stabilizing force. He caught Mark's eye and they exchanged a knowing nod. There was no time for doubt now. When night fell, the mood shifted again. The village was cloaked in a tense quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of an owl. Around a small fire, John and his comrades sat in a circle, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. The years apart melted away as they reminisced briefly about old times, their laughter brief but genuine. Yet, beneath the camaraderie lay the unspoken truth. This fight would be different. They weren't facing soldiers or a regiment. They were up against desperation, greed, and chaos. Mark broke the silence, pulling out a weathered rifle. "You'll need this," he said, handing it to John. "You led us then, and you'll lead us now." John took the rifle, running his hand over its familiar grooves. He felt the weight of it not just in his hands but in his soul. Standing, he addressed the group, his voice calm but resolute. "Whatever comes, we stand together. We've seen worse and prevailed. This village, These people, they're counting on us." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, the fire reflecting in their eyes as determination replaced fatigue. As the night deepened, John found himself walking through the silent village, Mark at his side. The homes, their windows glowing faintly, seemed more vulnerable now under the blanket of darkness. John's steps slowed, his mind flicking through every scenario, every contingency. "Do you think they'll attack tonight?" Mark asked softly. "I don't know," John admitted, "but we'll be ready." In his heart, he knew they had no other choice. With old allies by his side and a village depending on his strength, John walked on, his resolve hardening with every step. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a battle for everything they held dear. The night before the big storm, the village space was enveloped in a strange silence, as if nature itself was holding its breath and waiting. In the small house with a faded tiled roof, John sat at an old wooden table, the light of the creeping lamp shining on his face full of the wrinkles of the past. Next to him was an old walkie-talkie that he had just finished fixing after hours of patience. John's eyes, deep and quiet, turned to the window where darkness covered everything. His hands clenched every time the thought of what was to come crossed his mind. Outside, the people in the village's self-defense team moved silently, checking every corner and guard point. Whispers exchanged in the wind, and the footsteps touched the ground gently and carefully. John looked at them through the misty window, his heart mixed with pride and anxiety. The villagers, who used to live an idyllic life, now have to take up sticks, ready to resist the threat from outside gangs. He himself could not help the heaviness in his heart when he thought about the responsibility he had shouldered, about the safety of his loved ones. John slowly got up, adjusted his old coat, worn-out shoes, and grabbed a flashlight. He walked outside, immersed in the tense but determined atmosphere of everyone. The wind blew lightly but carried a cold that seeped into the flesh, as if reminding that a great storm was coming. "All must be ready," he said, his voice deep and decisive. "Tonight will be our real challenge." The eyes turned to him, shining with faith and commitment. In the thick night, the light from the small flashlights is like the fragile but resilient hope of the whole village, waiting for the moment to face fate. As the faint light of dawn gradually spread across the sky, John still sat quietly on the porch. The wind blew lightly, carrying the chilly air of the morning, but in his heart, a smoldering fire burned brightly. His gaze was fixed on the distant field, where the villagers were beginning to pick up and repair what had been destroyed. That scene, although simple, made his heart heavy. The image of each person standing up to fight, his brave eyes and his hands clenched into rudimentary weapons, appeared clearly in his mind. Sleepless nights, horrible screams, and resilience to overcome fear are all unforgettable pieces. John sighed softly, his body reminding him of the wounds, but his soul was heavy with responsibility. Last night, when the confrontation finally ended, he saw something deeper in everyone's eyes. Transformation, maturity, and pride that was hard to hide. "They did it," he muttered, his left hands clenched as if reinforcing his own convictions. Former comrades walked over one after another, looking tired but unable to hide their serenity. "John, we've won," one of them said, his voice hoarse but full of emotion. He nodded, not responding but just looking at them for a long time. In his eyes, each of these people is no longer comrades on the battlefield in the past, but family, who have written a story of courage and solidarity with him. As the child's voice gradually rang out in the distance, carrying the life of a new day, John stood up, his hand briefly touching the wooden chair that had been damaged in one corner. "Okay," he said, echoing, tired but determined. "We fought to protect this village. Now it's time for us to rebuild it." His words resounded like a call, evoking the latent power within each person. Each gaze gradually became radiant, each pair of hands clenched tightly. John walked slowly toward the small path, his back, thin but upright, steadfast. In that moment, everyone seemed to understand that the war was not only a challenge, but also a lesson to be remembered. And in the light of the morning, The small village once again affirmed its position as an unshakable home.